Well, let's bring in Karl Krüger. I don't know if Karl has ever had a day in the office. Hi, Karl. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you all?
Doing awesome. So, Karl and I met 3 weeks ago on Seattle Boat Show Live, which is every Thursday night from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. That's at openforboating.com. And Mark Bunzel always does a gang up job finding these tremendous superstar guests. And Karl, you were the guest then, and we set a world record for the longest amount of time. I think we went an hour and 15 minutes. My mom watches
Yeah,
it and sometimes goes to bed early because it's a different time zone there, but she stayed up for your entire show because
fun.
of how captivating you were. So no pressure here, Karl. But
Oh man,
well,
yeah,
you're featured in the movie Race to Alaska, the documentary, which we're going to be showing. I don't know if we even talked about this. So
No,
we're
we
going to
haven't.
show the Race to Alaska documentary, which is a Hollywood-style documentary, tomorrow at 6 p.m. That's brought to us by our friends at Fisheries Supply. And that's part of the activities. And Karl, you play a big part of that. You're featured
there's the
throughout, and
shirt
you're interviewed. And so for me, you've got many claims to fame. But one thing we talked about was the fact that you took a stand-up paddleboard from Port Townsend to where?
to Ketchikan, Alaska. That's the race course for the Race to Alaska. Is yeah, Port Townsend to Ketchikan.
And you fell off the paddleboard, I don't know, 500, 600 times?
Zero.
Wow, that was
Yeah,
the part.
Right.
Yeah.
not even once. Well, it was funny. Yeah, on that topic, there was it was day one out of Victoria, and I had brought a kite, a trainer kite that I thought that maybe I'd pop out if the conditions were right. And anyway, it was on that first day out of Victoria that I decided I wasn't going to use it. And so I gave it away when I hit Campbell River, and I decided I was going to go puritanical about it, and I was going to paddle every stroke. And then the other goal that I made for myself was that I wasn't going to fall, and I didn't. So that was good. It worked out.
And that's been the first adventure you ever had in your life, right?
That's funny. Well,
I'm trying. I am trying. Finally, we got them. Thank you, Karl. That's why you keep coming back.
that's funny. Yeah. No. Well,
No, no more.
what's the definition of adventure, right? And everybody likes to joke about how it's when everything goes wrong. And so I've had lots of adventures. Everything from and I was a climbing guide all through my I actually started in my teens and through my 20s, and sailing and skiing and ski racing and surfing. I've done a lot of different things. And stand-up paddleboarding, I only got into that about 12 years ago now. But because of my canoeing as a kid, my dad was a extremely good and talented canoeer from back east. I grew up paddling canoes in the Adirondacks with him. With the different board sports that I had done as a kid, surfing and windsurfing, plus the paddling, it was immediate. I mean, it all just made perfect sense when I got on a stand-up paddleboard.
How do you work out balance? A lot of people really do fall a lot when they first get on a paddleboard.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, that is a challenge. It's like anything, I mean, you develop a sense, right? You become one. I mean, my dad used to say that you're not a paddler until the paddle goes away in your hands, and that's true of the board as well. With enough miles, the paddle goes away, and so does the board. I mean, you don't even have to think about it anymore. So there's that, and then beyond that, there's that's actually a really great question. It gets pretty deep pretty quickly. I spent most of my time during Race to Alaska deeply in flow state, and when you're in that place, your physical and mental capabilities are at their absolute maximum. And it becomes a lot less likely that you will fall. And then beyond that, that's about keeping your blade in the water. So, when you're paddling to make miles, when you're actually getting after it and actually paddling, the goal is, to find a cadence that's not only sustainable, but keeps that blade out there at the catch, which is the very first part of the stroke, that's where all the power is. And so for me, I'm a very high cadence paddler. I like to have my blade in the water as much as possible. And I hit that first part of the stroke really hard. And that becomes a point of contact where you can gain a little stability. Anyway, yeah, that's how that works. So it's like having a third leg out there in the world. If that thing is firmly rooted and you've got your weight on it, it's pretty unlikely you're going to fall.
Well, I'm thinking about that Point Wilson rip. outside of
Yeah,
Port Townsend. I'm thinking I can barely hang on for dear life on my in-laws Nordhaven, and you're not able to
that's
fall off a
that's
paddleboard.
fun. Yeah. Well, what's interesting about that is, I mean, one of the many reasons that I wanted to do this race with a stand-up paddleboard is um, because it's a weapon. I mean, stand-up paddleboards are. I was not handicapped. I mean, it is a powerful tool for making miles. And what I saw in stand-up paddleboarding was a need to develop the sport a little bit. There aren't very many long distance stand-up paddleboards, more every year. I mean, it's definitely that is an aspect of stand-up paddling that is growing rapidly. But the board design has been a little bit limiting, and again, every year, more coming out. And so for this race, the year that I made it for the race to Alaska, I custom built a board with Joe Bark down in Torrance, California. He's just a genius shaper down there. Anyway, it's a planing hull. It's a non-displacement vessel that can plane, right? And so in conditions like you were just talking about in Point Wilson, I remember that the first year actually that there was a little bit of breeze and I got right in that rip and I was on full plane for the first 5 miles, and it becomes
First 5 miles.
it becomes effortless. I remember, I don't know if there's footage actually in that. I think it's in the Race to Alaska movie. There's some footage of the blue helicopter, and that helicopter caught up with me out there in that Point Wilson rip. I was just coming out of it, and I'm just full plane, just singing along, having the time of my life. And this helicopter came buzzing over my head and taking photos. I'd love to see how that looked. It was a really fun time. I enjoyed that. Yeah.
Karl, maybe people at home, you could just share the nuts and bolts of the Race to Alaska for you. How many days, how many miles did you average?
Yeah.
The kind of the intricacies of your daily routine.
There's a lot. So the race that year, I want to say there were 50 plus entries. It's about a 50% attrition. So about half of the boats that leave Port Townsend thinking that they're going to go to Ketchikan actually make it. And so that year, only 27 vessels made it to Ketchikan. Most of them sailboats. There were a few human-powered boats as well. And I was one of those. And I came in 17th out of the 27 that finished. My daily average, and I did it in 14 days from Victoria. So there's the first leg is called the Proving Grounds, and that's from Port Townsend to Victoria. And the thinking is that if you can make that leg happen across the shipping lanes and with weather and all of those vagaries, and there's a time limit on that first day. So they figure that if you can make it across to Victoria within that time limit, then you probably won't get yourself killed on the way to Alaska. So I made that happen 2 years running. Actually, the first year I attempted this was 2016, and I demolished my board in the first day. But it took me a few days to figure it out. I was up in Nanaimo when I figured out that my board was stress fractured all over the entire hull, and had been drinking water for a couple of days. And when I backed out of the race that year, I was up in 3rd or 4th place. I was way at the front of the pack. But it was a pretty crushing blow to have to pull out, doing as well as I was. But anyway, went back to the drawing board, kept training, built a board, came back the next year and made it happen. And it was, so to answer your question, it was 14 days on the money from Victoria to Ketchikan. And my daily average was 50 nautical miles. The longest day was 72 miles. And the shortest, I think, was 24 or 7, I think. The last day was about 50 miles pulling into Ketchikan too.
And having heard you share your story before, there was a time when you potentially thought you were going to be able to win it, right? You weren't just in it to complete it. You almost pulled it off.
Yeah, you don't race because you plan on losing. I do believe that one day, it's possible that a paddler can win this race. It probably won't be me, but that goes back to the reasons for doing the race by paddleboard in the first place. I'm a sailor too. I started sailing by windsurfing when I was about 12 I started. And then that rapidly progressed into larger boats. And now I run a sailing charter business here in the San Juan Islands. And So anyway, lots of sailing. I know the area. I've been sailing up and down this coast for years. And one of the things, early on when the race to Alaska, began, when they started running this race, in my mind, June on this coast is about the most fluky month of the year, when it comes to the wind, right? And, there's a reason why, sailing developed in lots of different places around the world. And it's because the wind was a reliable, way to power a vessel, right? To move stuff around and move people around. But on this coast, the Coast Salish and the tribes up north, it's always been about the paddle because it's the most reliable. And all you have to do is take care of yourself and make good decisions, and you'll get there. I mean, all you have to do is keep paddling. And then that thinking in my mind, plus just the absolute power behind stand-up paddling. I mean, it's one of the most sustainable and fast modes of paddle transportation that there is. So all those things sort of added up to ending up paddling this race by stand-up paddleboard.
What kind of weather did you encounter and conditions in those 14 days?
Everything. Everything. I could walk you through every single day of that race. I mean, almost every mile, and tell you exactly what was happening. I surfed waves that were head high around Cape Lazo, and I could see the reef, at my, in each trough, you could see the reef down there because I went inside the mark that's on Cape Lazo there. So I had, it was a southeasterly small craft advisory up in the Northern Straits, and I was out in it paddling. And I made it from just north of Nanaimo to just south of Campbell River in that day, and in a southeast small craft, and had some really good surfing around Cape Lazo. And then, the next day was pretty flat, pretty mellow to get to Campbell River. And then, that very same night, I didn't stay in Campbell River very long because there was a southeast gale forecast in Johnstone Strait. And anybody who sailed or transited this coast by any means knows about Johnstone Strait and what can happen in there. And, my concern in this race, obviously, for anyone that knows, is that there would be a big, heavy northwesterly that would just make it almost impossible to make any headway. And when I heard on the weather radio that we were looking at a southeast gale, it felt like a gift from heaven, So I was just gunning it to get to Johnstone Strait so that I could take advantage of that favorably wind. So I was in a gale in Johnstone Strait, surfing waves. I think my top speed that day was 12 knots. And, covered 50 miles that day. And then I had perfect glass. I paddled from just off the tip of, it was right by Alert Bay, actually, if anybody knows that section. I slept on the beach there at Alert Bay and ate some hamburgers, and got out about 3 a.m. and I was
it like,
gunning.
you ate like 5 hamburgers, right? Wasn't it something crazy like that?
I know.
Story.
I would have eaten more, totally.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then I had just perfect glass around up to Cape Cod, up to about 20 miles prior to Cape Caution, and then rounding the Cape, I had overhead waves, and then another, and I had glass. I mean, I had it all, there were glassy days, but those overhead waves were special around Cape Caution. That was amazing. But fine, I was carrying good speed and getting where I wanted to go. And that was the 72-mile day. That day, I did that in almost 13 hours of nonstop paddling. And the reason I did that is because the next day there was a forecast for a northwesterly, and I didn't want to be anywhere south of Cape Caution for that northwesterly. And so I ducked that, just paddled that real long day to avoid it, and then got up into Bella Bella that next night. And then it was just punky for a couple of days. So I ended up being forced to go inside. I had wanted to skirt Hecate Strait just because it's more direct and less influenced by currents. But I wasn't able to. I just couldn't get across the sound. It was way too rowdy out there. So I went up by the old canoe routes up on the inside and went through Jackson Narrows and ducked in by Klemtu and then up, Princess Royal in that way. And then all kinds of things. I had thick fog getting up into Grenville Channel there. I'm and the crossing across Douglas Channel there at thick fog. And by then too, I should mention that my radio had died, like dead died. So I didn't have a weather radio anymore. So I was on my barometer and just keeping an eye on the clouds and making my own calls. And then everywhere that I had cell service, which there aren't many places up there with that, I was able to pull up weather reports that way. But I didn't have a VHF. And so in that fog in Douglas Channel, that was a bit of a serious moment because I had no way of communicating with a tugboat captain or a ferry or anybody to avoid being run over. So that was a committing moment. But I had promised myself that if I was capable of paddling, I would, so that I didn't sit on the beach feeling sorry for myself if things were rough. So I paddled every single day. I never stopped.
Karl, can you talk about your caloric intake, your meal planning, your water prep, how that all
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
That's another funny one. So
funny? I think we have definitions of
funny.
funny
Yeah.
different.
Well, so I mean, there's a lot of logistics, right? I mean, it's a chess game to do this race and this coast in this manner. You know, there's a lot to think about, and food is one of them. And I realized early on, and knowing this coast, that there's really no reliable place to provision along the coast. And even where there are places, and I'll add to that by saying that I didn't want to be forced to go in someplace just to get food. So I made the commitment early on that I'd figure out how to carry my calories on the board so I didn't have to go out of my way to get any. Because that could easily put me in a situation where I'd end up, paddling upwind to go someplace to get food where I should be going the other direction and having an easy ride of it. So the commitment was to figure out how to power, how to fuel without having to go in anywhere. So one of my sponsors is Hammer Nutrition, and it's a company based in Montana that they've been designing fuels for endurance athletes for, almost 30 years now. And so that's all sort of, one aspect of this. And the other is that, what I was trying to bring to this race and this form of paddling and covering miles was this light is right mentality that I learned in alpine climbing in my 20s as a climbing guide. And it really just adds up to your favor to go as light as possible. I mean, weight is it's just a hindrance, right? And so I'm thinking about every little thing, I broke the handle off my toothbrush, and I mean, it's just every ounce. I was really careful about my weight. And food is heavy. So what basically the commitment was, I went to Hammer and I said, how do I fuel for this thing? I can't bring food. I'm not going to bring a whole bunch of fuel, So I did bring a stove and I had some fuel. I had a cup of miso soup every night before I went into my tent and slept. And I had a cup of coffee every morning. And those were my two big extravagances. But the rest of the time I was on Hammer Nutrition rocket fuel, basically. So they're Perpetuum tablets. They're about the size of a bottle cap and about twice as thick, and just packed with micronutrients and lactic acid buffering and all that sort of very focused. It's all science, it's kind of like it's like a malt ball, I guess, it has that sort of texture in your mouth. You wash it down with a little water. I was using one of their electrolyte replacements in my water. Basically 2 liters equals about 20 miles when you're paddling like that. And my water was full of these electrolyte replacements, which also had lactic acid buffering and along with the electrolytes to try to combat soreness. So there's that. So it was 4 of those per hour as I was paddling, and about every 15 minutes I'd eat one of those. And if I felt like I was, the pilot light was flickering, I'd have a little gel. And if that didn't work, I'd have a bar. And so I had a 4 bar per day budget, 2 gels per day, and 4 tablets per hour. And at night, when I was done paddling, it was a recovery shake, 2 of those, and a protein shake, my miso, and I would go to bed. And with all the work that it took to, build, find a place to set up my tent and get everything organized.
And it was a huge tent. It was one of those 18-person tents, Carl. I thought that was really big of you to bring that along. You get claustrophobic, I understand.
Oh man,
I mean, the tent is
yeah,
like the
that's
size of
funny.
this coffee cup. Like, I don't
Right.
know.
Yeah, it's
It was
funny.
like a
Yeah.
squirrel tent.
Yep. You just need a little bit of cover. I like the way you say budget too, because a lot of people, people, whether they're hiking the PCT or doing whatever, they have to budget everything along. So did you budget correctly, or were there times you're like, gosh, I don't have enough?
No, I was ahead. Yeah, I was
Okay.
ahead. I built in. So I had my budget for what my goal was 2 weeks actually. I mean that was my goal, but I budgeted an extra week just in case of weather, whatever. So I finished up with about a week's worth of that, fueling left. So I was in good shape. I had no concern in that way. Water was easy. What actually the driest part of this coast, the hardest place to get water is through the Gulf Islands and through Seymour Narrows and into Johnstone Strait. Like once you're into Johnstone, it's no problem at all. I ended up having to buy water at Hornby. I stopped at Hornby there and went into the little marina store and bought some water to fill up. And then it's dry, really, unless you want to go into Comox or beg it off of somebody on the beach once you pass Cape Lazo. But I filled up in Campbell River just on the tap on the dock there. And then, but then once I was into Johnstone, there's plenty of water everywhere.
Carl, can you show what it was like to turn the corner and come in to Ketchikan?
It's brutal, actually. I mean, yeah, it was one of the more emotional experiences of my life. Some of my friends who had completed the race in 2016 had told me, listen, man, when you come into Ketchikan and you're about to finish, just stop outside the breakwater and pull it together before you go in, so you don't lose it. But I had lost it way before that. There was a lot going on for me because I was having the time of my life. I was really happy to have made it happen. I'd set this goal, and a lot of people thought I was an idiot and or just crazy or whatever, whatever they thought. But I had this goal, and I wanted to make it happen. So I was proud of myself for having done that. But the thing is, when you've spent that much time in that flow state and everything is going as well as it was for me, you don't really want it to stop. So it was bittersweet. I was not happy to be done. There's a huge part of me that does not want to be done. I just want to keep going. So there's that going on. But then there's this pride, and there's a lot more attention than I ever really imagined I would get. Just paddling up into Ketchikan, there's a long stretch where, the road is right along the water there, and it took me a while to realize. I mean, I've never even been in flow state for that long. So there was a lot I had to learn about that too. But it was almost like coming out of it was a happy place, right? Like I was paddling. I was actually paddling better at the end, even though I lost 15 pounds. I lost a pound a day basically. I was paddling faster at the end than I was in the beginning. I was covering those 50 miles that I had set aside as a goal for myself every day faster by the end than I was in the beginning. Like there's, it's a healthy place to be. But at the same time, coming out of that is like coming out of like a dream almost. And so as I'm paddling up in the Ketchikan, I'm trying to pull myself together and realize that I was going to have to talk to people again. And, all of that. I didn't know what I was into on the dock. I didn't know what kind of scene it was going to be. But as I'm paddling, I slowly start realizing that on the road going into Ketchikan are all these cars parked and like flags and, horns and, there were all these people lined up and on decks on houses all along the way that were yelling. And so I lost it, emotionally speaking, long before I got to the dock. I had miles to think about, trying to readjust back to this world.
Well, Carl, you shared with us during Seattle Boat Show Live that there's another adventure in store for you as things start to open up with COVID and the vaccine. What's on your the horizon for you?
Well, in terms of paddling, I've got sailing projects too. But in terms of paddling projects, it was on that last day across Dixon Entrance, and that was a heavy, heavy day too, I have to say. I mean, there were these squalls that were ripping through from southwest to northeast that were every 45 minutes to an hour. You can almost set your watch by them. It was a heavy day getting across Dixon. I did it in one shot, from the north end of Grenville Island, cut to the east side of Dundas, and then right across into Alaska. It's 50 some miles that day. Boxing match of a day, but it was during that day when it really started coming. I started realizing that I'd done it, right? I mean, here I am coming into Alaska, and started having to deal with these feelings of not wanting to be done. And it was on that day, paddling across Dixon Entrance, that the idea for what I started asking myself is, what's next? Like, I don't want to stop here. Like, I'm just starting to get good at this. What am I going to do next so I can do this for longer? And the idea came to me to paddle the Northwest Passage. And so I've built a board and I've been training, and I had hoped to get up there in 2020, and that did not happen. Probably won't make it this year either for the same reason. But I'm hoping that in 2022, I can get back to Tuktoyaktuk up in the Northwest Territories, where I'll start paddling east, and I intend to finish up in Pond Inlet on Baffin Island. It's just shy of 2,000 miles through the Arctic.
And you're carrying a climate change message with you?
Definitely. I mean, just the fact that I can head up there and feel pretty confident that with the new summer wide window of ice out up there, that I can pull this off in a single season is decidedly as a result of climate change. There's no two ways about it. The ice is melting earlier in the year, and it's staying open much later. And that, again, is a result of climate change. And so, I'm up there talking to as many people as I can. I was up there the summer of 2019, and met a number of just amazing Inuit folks up there, talking to them about my plans and paddling and just kind of getting my feet on the ground. I had hoped to do it that year, but it just wasn't right yet. I knew I needed some more time to pull it together before committing to it.
So what would be your one thing that each one of us could do to counter climate change?
Well, awareness is huge. And if there's just one thing, I really wish people would drop this notion of belief. This isn't something that you can just opt out of. You know what I mean? The data's there. Scientists are some of the most competitive people on the planet. And when you have consensus among scientists that we have a problem, then we have a problem. And so I really would like people that push back against this notion of belief. Like, this is not an option. You don't get to just choose whether or not to believe this is a problem. We have a problem.
I like
Good
that.
answer.
Thank
That's
you.
the first person I've heard give that answer.
Same here. Yeah. That's why we had him on the show.
That's right,
That's why
yeah.
that's why you got the invite back, Karl. Thank you so much for being a part of this. It's Karl Krüger. It's Krüger, Kruger, escapes, escapes.com. And Karl's got the shirt on, Race to Alaska. That's to learn more about that expedition. It's r2ak.com. So r2ak.com. And then the movie that Karl's featured in, that's r2akthemovie.com. That will be part of Seattle Boat Show Connected, part of the activities portion that premieres tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Thank you, Karl.
Thanks, Karl.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Good to see you
Have a
again.
good night. Yep, you too. Bye.
Yeah. Makes me
Fascinating.
think twice about my goals.
Fascinating. Seriously.